Welcome back to the home of free speech here. Today's News Talk today, Tuesday, the 20th of August. I'm delighted to say I'm joined on the line from Budapest now by Taylor Hudak. Welcome to the program, Taylor.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Now then, we know that Hungary takes a unique position within the European Union towards the war in Ukraine, and that Viktor Orban is on good terms with President Vladimir Putin. He doesn't regard him as the next Hitler. And one of the side effects of this is that Hungary has eased its visa requirements for Russian nationals. And this is irking Brussels and the European Union. I'm glad to say that here in Britain now, we can do what we like in terms of that kind of thing, though, of course, there's an enormous amount of hostility from the UK deep state towards the Russians for reasons best known to themselves. So we're unlikely to ease visa restrictions to Russians anytime soon. But what strikes me about this story is the way that Hungary has been so aggressively attacked for this. I mean, it's not really anything of any tremendous strategic import. It's not like, sending weapons somewhere or actively colluding with a genocide. And yet European governments are absolutely furious about it, accusing Hungary of a campaign of lies and demanding an explanation. Brussels say these changes could allow potential Russian spies and saboteurs easy EU access, jeopardizing the security of the passport-free Schengen area. Well, they don't seem to be too bothered about people jeopardizing the security of the Schengen area when they come across boats from North Africa, the Middle East, and all the rest of it. So this is just more hypocrisy and meddling in another country's affairs from the European Union and singling out Russia, Hungary and Russians, obviously, Taylor.
Oh, absolutely it is. And it's important to keep in mind as well that Hungary has one of the strictest immigration policies of all countries within the EU. It may have the strictest policies, in fact. So it's very interesting to see now the EU leadership attack Hungary on this issue. But just to provide some background information on this, Hungary has expanded its fast track visa program and national card program and has opened it up to nationals from Russia as well as Belarus. And this has sparked a lot of controversy and outrage from the EU establishment and other EU officials. So this decision was first announced in July, in fact. And initially, it was only open to workers who were from Ukraine and Serbia, but it has now been open to, as I mentioned, those in Russia and Belarus, or Russian and Belarusian nationals, as well as individuals from 6 other nearby regions. And this move first gained attention within the European Parliament after the European People's Party chairman had criticized this move in an open letter to the European Council President, Charles Michel, stating that this new scheme in immigration policy in Hungary could perhaps pave the way to allow for Russian spies to enter into the EU and travel freely throughout the Schengen zone. And as a result of making the European Council chairman aware of this, other members within the EU, specifically nearly 70 members of the European Parliament, wrote a letter to Ursula von der Leyen asking that Hungary be removed from the Schengen zone. There was also a letter that was sent to, so it's gotten quite extreme. And now they seem to be caring about security and the safety of EU citizens now that some more permissions have been allowed to Belarusian and Russian nationals. But of course, that concern doesn't extend to those when it comes to the massive migration and open border policies that you have in the Union.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Hungary's foreign minister, Peter Szijjártó, is that a half-decent pronunciation, Taylor?
Yes. Yes.
Peter Szijjártó has snapped back, accusing the Baltic and Nordic countries of peddling lies. The inclusion of Russian and Belarusian citizens in the national card program does not pose any security risk from the point of view of the Schengen area, since these persons must still undergo a comprehensive check to enter and stay in Hungary. He said in a post on Facebook. Seems everybody communicates via social media these days, including high-ranking officials. I'm prepared to take Szijjártó at his word. Does he have the support of the Hungarian people?
Yes, I think so, because many of the migration policies that Hungary has adopted have been favored by those within the country. There is some internal political turmoil, which we will get into a little bit later. That is absolutely true, but people do tend to favor these policies. I actually feel quite comfortable in this country. It is a safe country. I don't feel fearful at all walking around at night. I think it is a very safe place to live in, to be at. And I do think that is because of the immigration policy. Now, Hungary was actually given a deadline of yesterday, Monday, to issue its reasons for expanding its national visa program to Russian and Belarusian nationals, but Hungary did not. They didn't provide a reason for doing this. And so it will be interesting to see what the reaction is. The EU Home Affairs Chief, Eva Johansson, said that certain measures would be taken given Hungary's response and reason as to why they opened up their immigration policy. But Hungary hasn't complied. And by the way, today is a national holiday in the country, August 20th. But Hungary is going to vet the people coming into this country. They always have. As I mentioned earlier, it's well known to have very strict immigration policies. So I think it is just a selective outrage that now officials within the EU are suddenly concerned about the safety of those that are living within the Schengen zone, as I mentioned, given that they have open border policies and allow migrants to come and travel all throughout this region.
Yes, exactly. The hypocrisy is absolutely startling. But is this because basically the European Union and the Commission in particular just don't like Orban and his government because they won't accept the migrants? They want Hungary to remain, for Hungarians, surprise, surprise, and remain a Christian country. They're absolutely exasperated with him over his friendship with Vladimir Putin and his anti-war stance. Of course, they all want war, just as long as it doesn't involve them and their children. And of course, Ukraine are continuing to block the release of aid worth $6.5 billion under the European Peace Facility, preventing member states from being partially reimbursed for the supplies that they've sent to Kiev. European Peace Facility is, of course, the opposite of what it actually is. It should really be called the European War Facility. Orban is out on his own, apart perhaps from Robert Fico in Slovenia, though right. He's got his own problems recovering from the attempted assassination, of course. Does it feel in Hungary like you're isolated within the EU?
That's an interesting point. I don't really feel that so much. Perhaps for those who have been living in this country, who speak the language a lot better than I do, they may feel a difference given the past few years, what has happened and sort of the tensions between Hungary and the EU. I don't really notice it. I honestly think it's something that we should welcome. To be quite honest, I am not a big proponent of the EU. I think it's just the political arm of the United States government. Honestly, that's my opinion of the EU. But I would say that, if we look at the context here, so in 2022, the EU suspended its visa facilitation agreement with Russia due to its invasion of Ukraine at the time. So this goes contrary to that policy that was initiated in 2022. Also, the EU closed its airspace and some of its land travel to Russia from the EU. And it's also important to note that each EU country is allowed to design its own visa policy. So it is very interesting, as I mentioned, that they are nitpicking Hungary on this specific issue. But I think it's just sort of numerous factors and just a tension that has been building up surrounding Orban and the policies that he has taken. I also think that there may be an intent to sort of tire the Hungarian population and make them feel frustrated with the current government in order for them to perhaps maybe want to elect somebody new come in the next prime minister election, perhaps.
Well, speaking of the upcoming elections, Orban's ruling Fidesz Conservative Party have been reigning supreme for a long time, but there's a political storm possibly brewing on the horizon. The tremors began on February the 2nd when an article about a presidential pardon appeared on 444.hu website, a left-wing online magazine website. The previous April, then President Katalin Novak, a member of Fidesz, had pardoned a man who had helped to cover up the crimes of a child molester. The pardon case has complex religious and political background, which is still partly unclear. It was countersigned by Judith Varga, Fidesz's top candidate at the time for the upcoming European parliamentary elections. At the time of the pardon, she was still serving as Minister of Justice, a post she subsequently gave up to represent Fidesz in the elections. This looks a particularly murky business, Taylor. What can you tell us about it?
Absolutely. So I remember when this news story came to light, it was in February of this year. As you had mentioned, it was about a political pardon that was issued back in the previous April. So that would be April of 2023. And this was signed off by the then president of Hungary, Katalin Novak. And it was countersigned by Judith Varga. At the time, she was the justice minister. She did resign from her position in order to run in the European Parliament as a top and leading candidate for the Fidesz party. Now, interestingly, her ex-husband is Peter Magyar, or Peter Magyar is probably the correct pronunciation, who is now a political hero, you could say, for some in this country, in Hungary, because he had emerged and revamped the TISA party, which means the Respect and Freedom Party. And his emergence into the political scene in Hungary really came at a time of this turmoil. I mean, after this report came out about this pardon, which upset, and I think rightly so, many people, there were protests and demonstrations in the streets. I remember this very well. I was trying to understand the situation. But as I had mentioned, this publication, this report in February received a lot of attention. At that time, as you mentioned, Judith Varga, as well as Katalin Novak, had to resign. However, there was still an atmosphere of agitation, general dissatisfaction in Hungary. And I think that's in particular in Budapest, I would say, maybe not representative of the entire country. But this presented a perfect opportunity for somebody like Peter Magyar to rise to prominence. And on February 11th, he had an unexpected hour-long interview with the left-leaning anti-Orban government news organization. I think it was published on YouTube, in fact, in which he claims that he had evidence of corruption, and that once this evidence was revealed to the public, and this, of course, he was referring to corruption on behalf of the Orban government, that this would lead to the entire government to resign. Now, it's important.
Okay, now just hold it there, but because before we go any further, I gather Magyar himself, and first of all, Magyaros. That's a word that literally means Hungary, doesn't it? So
yes, it does.
He's sort of called the equivalent of Mr. England or Mr. United States, Captain America. He's got the name of a patriot, even if he doesn't behave like one.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Magyar, his last name, is the term that is used for Hungary in Hungarian. So yeah, that's an interesting bit of information. Now, you mentioned he is not the patriot that he is being pictured as, but unlike the other opposition parties, his party, the TISA party, is actually taking a more pro-Hungary stance, whereas the opposition parties in the past have received money from the EU as well as the United States and were left-leaning, pro-EU, and wanted Hungary to assimilate with the EU a little bit more. That didn't seem to work so well. These parties have acquired a lot of distrust from the public because they received foreign funding from the United States and EU, as I said. So his party could succeed, and it did quite well during the previous parliamentary election. It could succeed because he is taking an approach of coming across as being very pro-Hungary, pro-Hungarian interests, and not adhering to the globalist agenda. But the party has yet to really release a detailed platform on what it stands on.
I look forward to seeing that. But first, we're going to take the news headlines. We'll be right back with Taylor from Budapest straight after this break. And welcome back to the Basil Valentine Show with me, Basil Valentine. I'm joined on the line from Budapest by Taylor Hudak. Now, let's get this timeline right. So the Justice Minister pardoned a child molester. Her husband had been in receipt of at least 10,000 euros a month, a very tidy salary, through plum board positions that he had secured through the party's influence. So Peter Magyar, was profiting from effectively his wife's closeness to power. Yes. She was a minister. But he went on a left-wing channel, Partisan, on YouTube, to give an interview in which he claimed that he had evidence of serious government malfeasance that he was soon going to release that would result in the resignation of the government, seemingly oblivious to the fact that he's been the recipient of $10,000 a month for various sinecures himself. And how does this link back into the pardoning of the child molester? And surely Magyar is turning against his own wife and biting the hand that's fed him. It doesn't seem to make any sense at the moment.
Right. When I look at this story, I think that it is likely, again, it's likely that his rise to popularity is not completely organic or authentic. So it's interesting that this report came out in February, on February 2nd. However, the pardon actually took place, as I understand it, April, several months earlier, the previous year. So that's interesting, that timing. Also, this came right before the parliamentary elections. He and his wife had divorced in March of 2023. Now, he actually released in March of 2024 recordings, private recordings in their home while they were still married. This was from January of 2023. The recordings took place, and then they were released March of 2024, in which he released these private conversations, which were intended to show or highlight corruption on behalf of the Orban government. However, nothing really came of this. I understand there was not much to that. So he seems to be somewhat of an interesting person. There has been questions about his character. So there have been reports in the media, and they have also been substantiated, I believe, by police reports that he was abusive towards his wife, that he's not a very nice man. He could be violent, loud, obnoxious, and that seems to be what his character is like to some, or how he is portrayed. However, it doesn't really seem to make much of a difference on his popularity, because some would say that this is somebody that is actually quite popular. And despite really having a solid platform with the TISA party, he has been able to gather quite a bit of support at various rallies. And he's basically running on this idea of the fact that the Fidesz party has stolen the country, that he's going to lead the reconquest. He presents himself, of course, as someone who is representative of Hungarian interests, and that he's not aligned with the pro-EU agenda or the green agenda. That kind of ideology does do well with Hungarians. They don't like the pro-EU stances, I would say, generally. So he has been able to do quite well in the recent election. The TISA party won about 30% support in the European parliamentary elections and won votes from 1.3 million citizens. However, Fidesz party still won in the end. It was those opposition parties that did quite poorly. So it will be interesting to see in the future if this TISA party does well. But he came to rise and he came to fame at a time where people were becoming more and more disillusioned, I'd say, perhaps, with the current government. And this pardoning of this individual who helped cover up a child predator's criminal activity is what sort of sparked the outrage and was the catalyst for all of this.
I take it he hasn't made these sensational revelations yet, or if he has, they haven't had the impact that he anticipated. But it seems to me like a clear case of sour grapes, and that basically he's just angry because he lost all his nicely well-paid jobs within days, apparently, of his wife's resignation from office. So he's just decided, he turned around and decided, well, if I'm not going to get 10 grand a month, then I'm going to start my own party and try a power grab. I mean, does he have anything unique to offer the Hungarian people?
Well, you're exactly right with what you say. I'm not so sure. He has yet to really release a solid platform and detailed ideas for his vision of the future of this country. Now, there have been reports coming out of Hungary I do want to touch on briefly, which I think are interesting, and that is that Hungary has declining birth rates, and that could really hurt the economy in the future. Now, this report in the Financial Times specifically refers to failures of the policies put forward by the Hungarian government, stating that the tax breaks given to families with children only benefits the middle class. One of the policies that they have here is that women who have 4 or more children don't have to pay personal income tax. However, some say, again, that this only benefits those who are middle class, not lower income families, because in 2011, the amount of children born per woman was 1.23. Again, these are averages. In 2020, that number rose, probably due to these policies, to 1.59 children born per woman. However, in the past year. They said the first half of 2024, the fertility rate decreased to 1.36 children per woman. Now, of course, something happened in 2021 and 2022. That was the implementation of an experimental injection that does impact fertility, that is not being taken into account here when we talk about fertility rates, not only in Hungary, but globally. So I want to just point that out. But the media as well here, I think, is also uplifting this person, that is Peter Magyar, and also citing these various stats, the fertility rates, et cetera, and sort of advocating for a change of government here. And I'm sure that the EU is very pleased about that.
Now, Hungary's got its own problems, though. Inflation reached 25% last year, seriously hitting the middle class and poorer countries, while growth has remained weak or non-existent, gross domestic product contracting by just under 1% last year, year on year. Has Orban got any solutions to these? Otherwise, the governments can't stay in power with those kind of numbers.
Yes, I understand. So what I know, what Hungary has done is that they have taken a similar approach that Ireland has taken, which is really focusing on foreign investments, which I don't know if that's a great policy. I'm not an economist, but from what I understand, there are other routes to help flourish the economy. But it has been focused, Hungary has been focused on foreign investments from China. I think this is quite interesting for the viewers to know about. But just earlier this spring, Xi Jinping had visited Hungary. He and Orban discussed various potential business deals. Beijing has also invested billions into this country and sees Hungary as a country within the European Union that it could really work with. And Hungary has opened and hosted various Chinese EV battery plants in hopes to make this country a global hub for lithium-ion battery manufacturing. Now, this, of course, has generated a lot of criticism from the mainstream media. I think it's also mentioned in a recent Financial Times report that's focused on specifically the fertility rate. So that's my understanding of what the economy approach could be in the coming years, a focus on foreign investment.
Taylor Hudak, thank you so much for joining us today on the Basil Valentine Show from Budapest.
Thank you.